Greetings! Welcome to the Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades tutorial video. We're going to be going over a whole bunch of stuff today, so if you're looking for something specific, make sure to check the details for this video as I've broken it down with a bunch of time codes based on sections. So where we're going to start here is assuming you might be completely new to VR. We're going to go over to some of the basic operations, and then we're going to go through a bunch of different sections for the various sorts of firearms. So to start, you've got your two hands here are sort of floating, glowy representations of our Vive controllers. The important thing to know about your hands is that these little spheres here at the top are the sort of center of your interaction zone. If you're going to pick something up, use an interaction, etc., you want to line that little globe up with whatever it is that you're trying to interact with. So given that, there are essentially two classes of interactions in H3. Guns, or sort of objects that are designed to be held long-term, and everything else. With the first category, guns, by simply putting our interaction zone into, say, where their handle is, and pulling the trigger, we can pick them up. Note, I'm not still holding the trigger here. I've just clicked it once, and then to drop it, I click the grip buttons, which are the buttons on the side of the controller here, to drop it. This is done for comfort reasons. Say you don't want to necessarily have to hold a button down the entire time while holding a handgun or a rifle or something of that sort. All other interactions, whether it's grabbing a sub-piece of a gun like the slide on this handgun, or picking up this magazine, are done by holding the trigger, and the moment you release the trigger, you will drop the item or end that interaction. So in the case of our Colt 1911 here, I click the trigger with this hand to pick it up, and then to pull it slide back, I put my hand up near its slide. I can tell I'm inside its zone because my controller is vibrated slightly. Hold the trigger down, pull it back, and then release it. And then pull the trigger to fire. So that's how basic interactions work in H3. Now, before we jump on to actually exploring some of the firearms and other objects, we want to cover something that is always available to you if a hand is empty, and that's called the Touchpad menu. The touchpad is this circular part of the controller here, and you open the touchpad menu by holding basically any part of it down for more than about a quarter second. Once it's open, you'll see this sort of radial disc here, and by thumbing around, note I'm not clicking the touchpad down, I'm just moving my thumb across it, we can select these four categories. These are a set of tools for ourselves. Now, if we accidentally open this or just want to close it in general, we just click down on the touchpad on that bottom quadrant, like so. So I'm going to open it back up. So what do we have here? So the first thing we have over on the left is what's called our touchpad teleport. This is one of our locomotion methods and is the sort of most default one. And you can see that as I point on a place on the ground that's valid to go to, we get this sort of blue circle, and we get a preview of where we're going to end up if we were to teleport to that point. We can choose to sort of accept this by either clicking on that quadrant of the touchpad or pulling the trigger. Either works. Boop. Teleported over here. Boop. I've teleported back. The other option we have is the sort of distant grab, and this is in place for those of you who might have a little smaller of a track range than is comfortable and don't want to have to be, teleporting around 0.3 or 0.4 meters all the time. We can simply point this at an object and pull the trigger, and it will retrieve it into our hands. Then, this top ellipsis, if we click on, brings us to a second level of the touchpad menu. These are the options that we don't necessarily want, instantly accessible, as you might accidentally click them. And they are, at the top, returning to the main menu. On the right, resetting the scene. Let's say you knock everything off the table or just have too many empty magazines in your scene. You can click that. And opening up the options panel. So I'm going to open up the options panel here. And this, we're still filling this out, so as time passes, there'll be even more of them. But these are your options for locomotion, sliding, control and input, and various gun options. Wonderful. So the way that works is that there will always be only one options panel. If you just go ahead and click that again with your hand, it will just retrieve the panel into your hand wherever it is in the world. So now that we've covered the basics, we're going to get ourselves some toys to play with and go over how handguns work in H3. So to do this, I'm going to go over to the item spawner. I'm actually going to teleport over to it. Boop. And we're going to take a look at how the item spawner works. It's a fairly simple, it's a little kludgy interface. This will eventually be replaced with something smoother. And we select the category of item that we want, so handguns, and then we navigate to the one that we want. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a bunch of these out of here and throw them on over by our firing position, and then we can take a look at them. Alrighty, so we've got ourselves a couple handguns to work with. Before we start firing these off, I thought I'd introduce another system that will be of much use to you if you're sitting here plinking, which is the Quickbelt system. As I look down here, you can see these ghostly globes. Think of these as sort of big pockets or holsters that are on your body. I can use these with any given objects, and I can basically just hover an object over a quick belt. We'll see that it's highlighted, and when I release that object, it will then stay in that quick belt holster. I can put my 1911 down here. Now, this has an extra feature specific to ammunition, either individual cartridges or magazines, which is that if I hover my empty hand over a Quickbelt slot that holds a magazine, I can click the touchpad and it will turn it blue. What this means is that this Quickbelt slot has been spawn locked. So if I now try to pull this magazine out of this slot, it will instead duplicate it for me. So this way, I can make sure that I never run out of ammo. So as you can see, I've just loaded this 1911. I'm going to go ahead and actually remove the magazine again, and we can go over all of the controls. So reloading in H3 is done very physically, meaning that it isn't just a sort of simple, quick trigger of putting the two objects near each other, which means that it's a little futzy, occasionally a little glitchy, and takes a little while to get used to. So I recommend doing it very slowly at first till you get comfortable with exactly how it feels. So I'm going to insert this magazine into the 1911. So we're loaded. And then we're going to pull the slide back to chamber around. So I'm going to take my alternate hand up here, hold the trigger down, pull the slide back, and then release. I actually accidentally ejected around because I had already chambered one. Whoops. And then now that it's set up like that, we are ready to fire. So we're going to aim it at our target and pull the trigger. So when a handgun runs out of ammo, we can see that its slide locks back on the last shot. So we're going to empty the magazine out of this, which means clicking on the lower quadrant of the touchpad. That will eject the magazine, and then we're going to grab another magazine and insert it in. Now, we're not quite done yet. We've got a mag in, but we're not ready to fire. We need to release the slide, and we do this by clicking on the left quadrant of the touchpad, or by simply grabbing the slide again and sort of pulling it back and letting it snap forward. So I'm going to do that with the touchpad button. And then I'm going to do it by just grabbing the slide and letting it snap forward. Wonderful. Then lastly, when it comes to handgun controls, we can also, in the case of, let's see here, if we actually dump a magazine out, when we work the slide, it's not going to lock back naturally, because there's no magazine inside the firearm to sort of, what's called the follower prevents the slide from moving back. We can, however, grab the slide, pull it back, and then hold up on the touchpad which will lock the slide back, which we can then release once again with the left side. There we go. Beyond that, most of the semi-auto pistols are pretty much the same. You'll notice ones like the 1911 have a safety, which you can engage and disengage with the right quadrant of the touchpad. But then some of the handguns don't have a safety that you can actuate like that. Check out the G22 here. Mark III. This one, we grab this little bit on the back here. Or our P250. Wonderful. So that's what you need to know to use handguns in H3. So moving right along, we're going to now talk about submachine guns and rifles. I've lumped these into the same category in part because they tend to share the same control mapping. One thing that you'll learn very quick in H3 about SMGs and rifles is that even though they share many of the same base controls, they're quite different mechanically, which means that the reloading actions and the way that the bolt can work in them can end up being subtly different. And you end up getting mixes and matches of various sorts of features across a number of different classes of rifles and SMGs. So we're going to start with something that's likely going to be the most familiar to you, which is an AR pattern rifle. So this is the Mark 18. We've got two rifles like this in H3, the Mark 18 Mod 0 and the M4. And the way these work is that we have a fire selector button that is the left quadrant of the touchpad. We can see the fire selector right there, and we can use this to go from safe, semi, to burst, and then loop back to safe. And we have the sort of magazine well there. We've got a charging handle on the back. If you haven't seen one of these, this is almost like the slide of a handgun, but functions a little bit differently. So let's go ahead and spawn lock our magazine and load this up. So we load our first mag, grab the charging handle, pull it all the way to the rear. You can see our magazine is loaded in there, and then release it. We have now chambered around. We're going to click the fire selector over to semi, and then we're going to do something you can do with two-handed weapons, which is that we can grab the foregrip to stabilize them. So I'm going to go ahead and place this sort of in my shoulder where it would be, and then place my alternate hand up at the foregrip, and then just click once with the trigger. And you'll now see that the gun now aims to essentially align itself with my foregrip. Awesome. So let's take a couple shots. Now, as with handguns, the M4 is what's called a bolt hold open firearm, meaning when I empty the magazine, which I'm going to go ahead and do here now, the bolt locks open when the last round has been fired. This means that when we reload it, so I'm going to click the touchpad to release my alternate hand, click down on the touchpad to dump the mag, and then load another magazine in. We're essentially almost ready to go. We need to make the bolt go forward, though. We can do this by simply tapping the bolt release button there on the side of the rifle, which will make the bolt go forward, making us ready to fire. So we've got two other firearms here. We've got an MP5 and we've got an AK. Now each of these share, as I said, some similarities with the way the Mark 18 works, but there's some subtle differences. Let's grab the MP5 first. So we're going to despawn lock and remove our magazine from the Mark 18 and spawn lock our MP5. So let's go ahead and load that. go ahead and set ourselves over to semi. Now the MP5 has a charging handle of its own, but instead of being back here, it's up here. So we grab this, pull it all the way back, and let it snap forward. We're ready to fire. Let's go ahead and empty this. Go over to full auto. So, we've just fired our last round. Note how the bolt has not been held back. The MP5 is not a bolt hold open weapon, which means that we're going to have to reload it and we're going to have to recharge the weapon as though we had just were about to fire it for the first time. So I'm going to take my hand off, and now if I click down on the touchpad, what's going on? Our mag doesn't come out. Well, that's because unlike the sort of M4 pattern weapons, there's no handy mag release button that this hand can reach. Instead, we have to actually grab the magazine. So I'm putting my alt hand in the magazine, holding the trigger down, and then I click the touchpad. Imagine it like your thumb pressing that magazine release latch there. That will free the magazine into my hand. I can throw it behind myself, and I can load another. Now, one thing to show you as well is that some folk firing an MP5 weapon like this like to use what's called the HK slap when reloading it, which is when you've just fired your last shot, you grab the charging handle, and then while it's back, you rotate it up, which locks it back. You dump your empty mag, you pop your new mag in, and then you slap the charging handle forward, and you're ready to fire. And that's how you use an MP5. And then the last rifle for us to go over is our AKM, in which most of the Russian rifles that are in H3 function very similarly to this. If you've already fired the MP5, this should feel nice and familiar. First off, we have our fire selector, which works a little differently. It's here, and you'll notice that when it's in the safe pattern, it actually prevents us from pulling our bolt back. And so it's important, if you want to actually charge your weapon, you have to go ahead and take it off safe first. So I'm going to load, grab the bolt, which is here. You'll notice there isn't a separate bolt and bolt handle on the AK. They're integrated together. Grab it on this side, pull it back, release. Also, with these, the first setting on the fire selector is not semi, it's full. And then the second setting is semi. There you have it. Let's go ahead and empty this. Now to reload, we can do one of two things. We can either do what we did with the MP5 there, which is to grab the magazine and pull it out, or we can do a special reload action that the AK pattern weapons have, which is to take another magazine and do a tactical reload where we come in and we hit the magazine latch with the other magazine, knocking it out, slamming our new mag in, ready to go. And that's how you use AK pattern weapons in H3. So next up, we're going to go over shotguns. Now for shotguns, we've got three primary types. We've got break action shotguns, pump shotguns, and semi-auto shotguns. So we're going to start with the simplest and in some ways the most sort of classic and fun. So a break action shotgun is an incredibly simple weapon to use in H3. We simply have to open its breech, and we do this by either putting our alt hand over this latch and clicking it, or if we want to close that again, just clicking left or right on the touchpad. Now, once the breech is open, we can close it again one of two ways. We can either flip it up like that, just using the inertia of the fore end of the shotgun, or we can grab the foregrip of it by holding the trigger with our alt hand and simply moving it up. So let's pop that open. I've gone ahead and spawn locked a 12 gauge shell to my Quickbelt. I'm going to insert 2 rounds there. Close it. Fire some 0-0 buck out of that. Now, once you've fired, we can open this, and to eject the shells, we can just tip the gun back, and they'll pop right out. That's all you need to know about using a break action. Next up, we've got our pump. I've got the shorter of the two that we have in here. Now, the way this works is that we have a foregrip just like we did with our rifles, except that once we grab the foregrip and we've released the trigger, so our hand is already bound to the foregrip, if we pull and hold the trigger down, we can pull the foregrip back to rack it, and then pull it forward again to close it. I then have to click the trigger to decock the hammer. So, how do we go about loading the pump? Well, the order of operations that I've seen suggested most frequently is that we pull the foregrip back. Then we're going to actually release our main hand, not our alt hand. So I'm going to release my right hand off, which allows me to keep holding this gun with the left. I'm going to pull a shell out, and I'm going to pop that right into the chamber. I'm then going to grab the handle again, hold the trigger down with the left hand, pulling the foregrip forward, release the main hand again, go ahead and load a couple into the tube magazine on the underneath. Let's fire this sucker. I believe we're empty. Now, if you don't like just the whole having to remove your hand off the handguard, you don't have to do that. You can totally just pull this back, take your hand off the slide, load the chamber, pull that forward, and reload it from this angle. Let's fire this as fast as we can. Far too much fun. And that's what you need to know about using a pump action shotgun in H3. And then finally, out of the three, we've got our semi-auto shotgun, our 1014. This has a bolt and a bolt handle, not unlike some of the rifles that we've been playing with. So what we can do, grab the 4, we can pull the bolt back, go ahead and load one into the breech, pull the bolt again to snap it forward, and then with this over our shoulder, go ahead and load the tube magazine underneath. Far too much fun. Also, just so you know, you can also release the bolt by simply clicking left on the touchpad. And that's what you got to know about using a semi-auto shotgun in H3. Alrighty, well, we're over in the warehouse range now to play around with our next set of objects. They are our explosive ones. We've got two types of things to play with so far, which are the M79 Thumper grenade launcher and some throwables. So let's see, as it's close to our break action shotgun, let's do the M79 first. This is loaded, one shell at a time. To open it up, we just click left on the touchpad or right, just like the break action shotgun. Insert our shell, grab our 4, and pull it up. Line ourselves up. Boom. Take a shot. Next up, we have our throwables. So we've got a couple things. Some of them are fused, some of them we pull a pin on. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up our M219 grenade here. Now, the way this works is that we have a pin that we can pull out of it, which I'm going to do now. I'm still holding on to this with the trigger. I'm just going to throw that in the trash there. Now, to sort of prime the grenade to fire, we can either just release it as part of our throw, in which case the spoon will pop off, or we can click the touchpad to go ahead and release the spoon and start the fuse ticking down. It's got about a 3.2 second fuse, so you want to throw it real quick after popping that spoon off. I'm just going to go like that. Yonk! Make sure, by the way, before you use the throwables that you've got your tie straps on your controllers affixed to your wrist. Don't want to go throwing a Vive controller across the room. We've got our cyber grenade, which is pretty similar to our last one, except for the fact that before we pull the pin, we can click the touchpad to cycle between different fuse times. So we can have this explode almost immediately or after like 12 seconds. I'm going to do it on 5. Let's see, where are we going to throw this? I'll throw this over there. Landed a little short. And then next up, we've got our lightables. And so to handle these, I'm going to show you our 2 ways of producing fire right now. The first is our Flipso lighter, which can be flipped out by simply going like that, whip it shut like that. And then once it's open, to light it, just drag your thumb down. You don't need to click it. Just drag your thumb down across the touchpad, and that will light our lighter. Now we can grab our stick of dynamite. Start that fuse going. Yonk! Boom! Wonderful. And if you want an even more sort of manual way, we can pick up our Patriot matches, click the touchpad to open the box of them, grab a match out, and these are strike anywhere, so we can strike them on the table. I'm going to try to do it on the side. It's been a while, personally. There we go. Like that dynamite. Yeah. Boom. Wonderful. And then lastly, we've got some other goofy explosives like this banana grenade. Far too much fun. Now, if you check out the item spawner under the question mark category here, there are a bunch of different other toys to play with, from tippy toys to, actually no, they're under the explosives. We've got Roman candles, we've got some bang snaps, a whole bunch of stuff for you to give a try. And then lastly, if you'd like some just very lightly structured shooting over in the warehouse range, like say with the Tokarev here, we've got a little target spawner here. The way this basically works is we pop in a numerical code. The first digit is the number of targets we want, the second digit is the number of waves, and the third and fourth is the amount of time we want to give. So I could just pop up, say, 519 here, get this ready, hit this button here, and so forth. If you want something more complex with moving targets and a lot more structure and some competitive high scores, go ahead and head on over to the modular range. All right, now that we've covered all of our different types of weapons, we're going to move on to the weapon attachments system. Please note that this system is still under construction. It's still being tweaked, especially the sort of specific capabilities of certain attachments. So if, several weeks down the line from the date of the posting of this video, if things work a little differently, and you get confused, make sure to just check out the latest devlog to see what's been tweaked. So, starting off, how does weapon attachment work, and what can we put on our firearm? Let's start simple. We're going to start with a simple red dot sight here. Now, the way attachments work is that we simply have to make sure the underside of the attachment contacts the mounting rail that we wish to affix it to. So notice how as I go like this, it then sort of magnets that attachment onto the rail. I can sort of slide it along. Note I'm still holding the trigger down on this attachment. And when I just release the trigger, the attachment now sticks directly to our rail. If I want to reposition it or remove it, I have to place my alt hand inside the attachment, hold the trigger down, and then click down on the touchpad, the lower quadrant. That will allow me to move it, or if I pull it away, snap it back off the weapon. So we're going to pop that back on real quick. Now, most attachments have another sort of button associated with them, at least one. In the case of hollow sights and red dot sights, we can change the zeroing distance of them. What this basically means is that when I look through this sight and see that red dot here, that is set up to essentially be displaying the red dot where a round is going to hit at a certain range with the weapon. If I want to change that base point, I simply have to hold the trigger down over the attachment and then click left or right on the touchpad, and we can see we can change. Here, I'll get that on screen. Note how the position of the dot changes based on our zeroing distance. So we're out at 35 feet here. So about 10 meters should give us a pretty accurate shot. Let's give it a shot. Bring that in. Wonderful. Cool, so let's send this back out to 35. So that's the simplest type of optic we can put on here. We then have several other types that they each have sort of different constraints and abilities. The first one is sort of a combination. You'll notice in the item spawner, there are currently two attachments called magnifiers. There's a 2x and a 3x. And if we put this on the rifle, we'll notice we don't get any sort of reticle with these. The reason for that is that these are meant to be combined with another type of sight, like an elevated hollow sight. Let's pop that to 10 meters, which we can see the reticle of through our sight, but still sort of use the rifle independent of the magnifier, or quick swap it out. Let's pull that nice and far back. Wonderful. Pop these back off. There are also scopes, which are both magnification devices, and they have a reticle of their own. Right now, there's the ACOG, which is just a fixed 4x magnification. And our sniper scope here, which is a variable magnification. It defaults to 3x, so you can see the target looks about that large. But we can grab the center of it here, and instead of changing the zeroing distance on the scope, all scopes are zeroed to 100 meters. We can turn that all the way up to 12x magnification. Wonderful. In addition to optics, we've got a couple other types of things. We can throw a laser on. To turn the laser on, put your hand in, hold the trigger down, and then click up on the touchpad, and that will give us a nice dot to work with. You can see it there. And we also have a flashlight we can throw on. Let's pop that on that rail. Once again, once it's attached to the weapon, hold down trigger over the attachment and click up on the touchpad. And now we've got ourselves a tactical flashlight. And then last but not least, if you're feeling your gun isn't quite fancy enough, you can always throw good old stars and stripes on there. And that's what you need to know about using weapon attachments in H3. And now for the last section of this tutorial for now, what we're going to be covering is using multiple ammunition types. Now for this demonstration, I'm going to be using a firearm that's in our shotguns category. This doesn't exist in real life, by the way, but it's just too much fun not to put in here. We have a magazine-fed shotgun, and we have our ammunition panel, which can be found in most levels. And if you don't see this sitting around, it's available from the item spawner under the ammunition category. What this allows us to do is basically pick a caliber, so in this case 12 gauge, and we can pick any of the available ammo types for it, and either spawn a sort of handy-dandy ammo box from which we can draw more rounds from, or a single cartridge. So let's start and take a look at our mag and talk about the way that sort of loading, unloading, and duplication of magazines works. I'm going to go ahead and empty this out. If you have a magazine in your hand, if you simply click the touchpad, it will dump a round out of it. Let's make sure these don't fall off. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and also open up our options panel here, as there are some options related to magazine duplication here that are important to us. Basically, you'll notice under the gun options, there's this option, magazine duplication uses default load. What this means is if it's set to no, and I take a magazine that's, say, empty here, put it in a Quickbelt slot, spawn lock it, and duplicate it, I will get another empty magazine. If, however, this is set to yes, and I duplicate this magazine, I will get another loaded with the sort of default ammo type for that magazine. So I'm going to keep that on no for now, and we're going to toss that over there. Cool, so let's go ahead and load our magazine with some different ammo types. So we can, let's see here, we can load some slugs. Don't go rolling off on me. We can load, some Dragon's Breath, some Flechette, and we'll top that off with some Freedom Fetty. Let's pop that over there, pick up our mag. Now to load the magazine, we just pick up a round and place it against. If you have a round in your hand and a magazine in your hand, and you can't manage to load it, you're either trying to put the wrong type of round in the magazine, or it's already full. I'm going to put some Dragon's Breath in, some Flechette, and some slugs. Pop this in here. Charge it. Note that the last two types of rounds that we put in this are low pressure 12 gauge rounds, which means once we get to them, you'll notice they're not going to cycle the action on this weapon, and we're going to have to charge it again manually. So we're going to, just for fun, we're going to turn on our bullet trails, also in the gun options, so we can see our trajectory. So there's our slugs. Next up is our Flechette. There went our first Dragon's Breath round. Eject it. And our Freedom Fetty round. Festive! And that's what you need to know about using various sorts of ammo in H3. So to finish things off, if you're still watching, I just wanted to say thank you for having the patience for going through this whole long tutorial with me here. I know it would be ideal if more of this sort of information is in-game, but obviously we're still early access and we're pushing new content each week, and so it's made sense to us thus far to update tutorial information in video form like this, because it's much more rapid for us to get them produced and get them out to the community. Don't worry though, at some point more of this will be explained in-game, and yeah, so until I see you guys next time, and happy shooting.